Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our Black History Month webinar entitled The Impact of Mentoring on Technostress and John Henyrism During the Continual Pandemic. Let's get everyone settled just for a little bit, make sure everybody's logged in, and then we'll get started. And I do want to let everyone know that this webinar will be recorded and posted on YouTube. And before we get started, I'll be giving a brief intro about the National Research Mentoring Network, NRMN, and introduce you to our speakers today, Doctors AJ Hinton and Sandra Murray. So founded in 2014, NRMN is an NIH grant-funded initiative whose entire purpose is to diversify the STEM workforce. We do this by providing researchers across all career stages in the biomedical, behavioral, clinical, and social sciences field with evidence-based mentorship and professional development programming that emphasizes the benefits and challenges of diversity, inclusivity, and culture. Our program achieves that through mentorship, networking, and professional development through our online networking platform, MyNRMN, which currently has over 21,000 mentors and mentees. We encourage you all to visit our website, nrmnet.net, to learn more about our resources. NRMN is happy to have our speakers join us for today's webinar. Dr. AJ Hinton Jr. is an EE Just Faculty Scholar and Assistant Professor at the Vanderbilt School of Medicine Basic Sciences. Dr. Sandra Murray is a professor in the Department of Cell Biology at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. NRMN is delighted to provide this opportunity for everyone to participate in this webinar and have your questions directly answered by our speakers. We'll be offering a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so we encourage you to type in any questions you may have in the Q&A feature or the chat down below. From NRMN, we want to give a special thank you to our speakers for making this webinar happen. And now I will pass it over to them to begin the webinar.
Thank you, everybody, for having us. I first wanted to say that Dr. Schuler wanted to be here. She has a health-related issue, so she wanted to apologize, but she'll be back later in the seminar series. I think next week we'll switch between, I think, Dr. Murray and Dr. Schuler, so you guys can see her too. So thank you so very much for having us, NMRN, and we really appreciate this opportunity to share about Technostress with you all, as well as John Henyrism and how mentors can continue to contribute and pay close attention to these particular, make more aware to these particular things that could be harmful, especially during the pandemic. So I always like to give a brief outline of what's going to go on. So the first part will be about technostress, stress, and John Henyrism. The second part will be about managing of technostress, John Henyrism, and stress. Dr. Murray will do the second part. And then I also wanted to start just in good faith because everyone, you know, when we're looking at information, it's a lot usually to take in, especially when they're new concepts. So I want to always assume, and when I'm saying you all or us, it's referring to everyone, including myself on the call. So I just want to say that I assume that you all are good individuals and that the information will be taken lightheartedly and that you will work through it with your own time. There's not something that you have to do right away. And then I also want to assume that you desire a positive workplace. And so these are helpful suggestions and strategies as we talk to mitigate these concepts for you to be able to use in your laboratory or your other types of work arenas. And then we also want to assume that no one or very few of you are trying to intentionally harm anyone or who could care less about other people's feelings. So I just want you all to just be aware that I know that everything that's said and things are done in a way that are scenarios, so they're not to attack you. And then lastly, I just want to assume that we all are fallible, that we're all here to learn together. And so we all just need to remain teachable and humble so that we can have a great time. But with that being said, I would like to start out with stress. And, you know, I'm pretty sure we're all experiencing stress. And stress can be something that is sometimes placed upon us or something that our environment allows us to feel. And when we think about it as mentors, We all have to pay very careful attention to the possibility that stress could alter the career climb. Maybe some individuals that are maybe underrepresented or from a particular gender or sexual orientation may need the assist of a mentor to be able to come up the mountain and then take a pause, and then a mentor may need to do a pulse check again and then again, before the little mentee can be able to get up and be able to climb to success at the top of the mountain. And remember that every apex, there's always, you have to go back down the mountain and start again to something else to climb. And so mentors, remember, this is a continual process with stress, and that really stress is something that we all want to pay attention to. So what is stress? Stress in general is just the feeling of being overwhelmed or unable to cope with a mental or emotional pressure. And so these things are any example. For example, let's say the news that we're watching on TV or social media, and it continues to trigger us something that you feel uncomfortable. This can be a type of stress. Also, normally your body has some type of reaction. It's usually physical, emotional, or intellectual response to how an adaptation is occurring. So basically, let's say I'm constantly picking up the phone always because people are calling me because they want to get in contact with me for some diversity, equity, inclusion concept, or they want to do some writing. It's actually okay to say no to some of those things, because if you're not saying no, that actually going to continue to hurt you in the context of developing more and more stress. And remember from last week from time management, we talked about spacing out your schedule to protect yourself. And so Dr. Murray will talk more in detail in the second half about how to protect yourself. But I just wanted to remind you all about last week's seminar and connecting it to this week's seminar. Also, how do we all experience stress? Well, that's very interesting and kind of hard to conceptualize. And the reason I say that is because we're all individuals and we can perceive stress differently. And with each individual person experiencing stress, we have to be aware as mentees and mentors that we have to have this open dialogue. Conversation is the key thing to being able to unlock how people are stressed. And we have to respect how individuals may perceive stress. Someone may say, walking their dog is a very hard thing to do when they have to, do this experiment and they're trying to manage, their time. So be aware that something as simple as this could cause someone harm, or something more drastic. Someone had experience with, driving. So they, are now, riding an Uber. So all these different things, we have to be willing to be open to talk about these things, because it can also impact how we perform at the workplace. And then remember, one experience that you may have had may be fun, where you may have been on a roller coaster, for example, and you enjoyed the ride, but someone else thought it was traumatic, and now they think that anything related to heights is a problem. And so these all are just, different types of examples of where experience can be amazing for one person, but unpleasant for another. And we have to be very careful. So in certain situations, we've already developed habits around stress that leads to technostress. And so some of those habits could be where we actually are on high demand for being on the computers always. Like, for example, we're on Zoom now, and I'm pretty sure a lot of us are already Zoomed out, but we have to use this platform because of the pandemic. So a couple of things to think in mind is that this may not be the only way that we're experiencing technostress. You may consider it the most forefront issue, but there are other ways, such as your cell phone, other overuse of social media. Let's say you have, a ding every time something goes off. Let's say you get 700 likes for something and it's just constantly going off, or you get 1,000 likes for something that's constantly going off. That can be annoying, and it also can create this trigger. So we have to be careful about our time that we're spending around technostress. And then also, we're very reliant on GPSs. We're also very reliant on not having a break, especially in the United States. But we should also maybe think about worldly as well. There are other places that, take, some days off. These things need to be kind of studied in a little bit more detail to be able what's to be the next forefront in combating technostress. So as we talk about technostress is multitasking in some ways, but doing it not in a controlled environment. And so one way I would like to think about technostress is by this illustration. Dr. Murray and I all have a Technostress paper coming out pretty soon, and this is the cartoon from it. And I would like to thank my postdoc in the lab, Zarvu, who did this illustration for us. So if we're thinking about being in the laboratory all at the same time, we might be on an iPad, we might be on a laptop, a cell phone, pipetting and looking at the microscope and trying to figure out the computer that's attached to that. That in itself is sometimes multitasking, right? But at the same time, all of these different types of information are plugging in can create stress along with other issues that we have to go to, maybe seminars where we may experience social stress and pressure to speak or to actually be able to interact with individuals. Oh, okay. I thought there was a question. Thank you for the comment. And then also in the context of there are very specific types of techno stress that we'll get into. For example, information overload or technological invasion. So these are things that we have to really understand and how to create coping strategies for each individual one of these. So as we think about techno stress, how do we have a better understanding of where techno stress can arise? There's a book that's something that I would like for you all to maybe read when you have time, called Technostress, and it really talks about how frustrating certain experiences are and how we all have them. So I would love everybody just to kind of think of an experience that that maybe you haven't come on top of the technology. I'll go first. For example, sometimes when I have to, do a data dump from Mayo to Vanderbilt for my structural stuff, I'm always having to buy a new terabyte hard drive, and then sometimes I'm breaking them, and then I'm like, well, how do I recover my data? And I get all scared because I'm like, well, I backed it up on the box, but I don't know if it's gonna, be the same, and it becomes a real issue. So sometimes I just don't win with technology, even though I'm doing it, using it all the time. Other examples of this would be on social media. Let's say that you're very active on social media and you're getting added all the time. Sometimes I feel like that it's not in the context as a bad thing. I feel like I don't post a lot, but sometimes I'm tagged in stuff and it's okay. But sometimes it can be overwhelming. So maybe pulling yourself back some and identifying, how this modern disease of adaptation is causing yourself an inability to cope with a new computer or other types of technology, and figuring out a healthy manner to address these things may be imperative. So one thing I would like you all to think about is technostress. Technostress is a concept that came from Craig Bro, specifically around 1984, but people say the mid 80s. And this was in the information technology management area. And it's now starting to expand broadly into psychology as well as some of the other stems. But one thing I want you to kind of think about is that the origin is really based around a critical mass of cell phones, social media, and tablets appearing. And so this phenomenon has spawned this, and it's now been coined into 5 different categories where we're able to really kind of picture and understand what they are in the context of technostress. So when you're thinking about technostress, there are 5 different ways that you could experience technostress. It may not be just having a tablet in your hand or being on social media. So I really want you to pay really close attention to these particular concepts. So right now there are 5, and they may be expanded based upon the research that comes out. And if you see the word ICT, it refers to information communication technology. This particular reference is from the ones that are over to the right and the ones that are proceeding throughout the next 4 or 5 slides, if I remember correctly. So first, I'd like to start with techno overload. The definition that I've kind of gleaned together from multiple sources is that it's a situation in which users feel forced by ICT to work faster and longer. Another way to think about it is you're just working too much. Simply, when you have technology, it allows you to have greater access to multiple arenas in a faster way that you normally wouldn't have access to. Sometimes, for example, if I'm moving over to my bookcase, I might have to find, let's say, a book, and I'm trying to look for a book, let's say, The Science of Effective Mentorship in STEM, right? And I need to go to this chapter, and this is going to take too long, right? But if I scan this or buy the Audible book, oh, it's okay. I'm in the middle of a seminar. So if you have this particular case, then you may want to do the Audible version, right? Because that is going to allow for you to be able to work faster, and you keep scanning. But then let's say you want to do another book, and all over time, too many books at the same time could be overloading. So thinking about the time management concept of when you want to maybe do a particular concept may be something to mitigate this techno overload. And then another strategy for you to think about is where you are looking at techno invasion. So techno invasion is a complex use of computers, understanding which situations in which you have to work and have to also manage your private life. And see, this is when they merge together and where there's no constant set of parameters or barriers, if you will, to impede technology to come into your personal life. And so you always want to think about how you're overexposed to people and also what's potentially going on outside of your network. It's kind of in the concept where we used to think that, there's 6 degrees of separation of people, right? Well, that's kind of how you maybe want to start thinking about social media, where maybe some days, of the 7 days, you might take 1 day of rest. And then when you start to adapt more, you may take, 3 or 4 days off, and then you do one concept at a time. And not only are these 2 concepts important, but there's still 3 more. And so techno complexity is described when there's a constant use of computers and there's an overwhelming amount of complex systems. I mean, like, for example, one day you may have to do R programming, the next day you might have to do Python or C++, and then you have to induce changes in artificial intelligence. So all of these different concepts are keys to where you have to kind of balance what's going on. And if it's constantly going forward, every day there's a new concept that's building, a new software that's building, it becomes very complex to keep up. And this is something that, we all have to kind of be aware of when we're in our daily work environments, as well as in our laboratory arenas. So just a mentoring plug here, mentors maybe take a poll during a lab meeting or a journal club and ask everyone, how are they dealing with technology? Just to kind of get a basis for that. And if you're kind of afraid to do that when you're doing the individual development plan or a mentoring contract, maybe go ahead and assess that you'll assess what's going on in the context of technology every 3 to 4 months. So then they'll come to you to be able to talk about it, because it may be a difficult concept to think about, because you may not want them off of the technology, right? Because it's going to allow them to do the job. You're going to be able to analyze the data. But we also have to think about the mental health and the emotional safety of others. So another thing to think about is techno insecurity. Techno insecurity is something that really comes up a lot. And remember, mentors, there are people that are afraid that they may lose their job. So they may be overly impressing you, maybe working too much, and it's going to create a balance that's not healthy. So think about that in the context of not only doing physical labor, but also using the technology to perform those tasks. So we have to be aware that we have to make our employees, our mentees or trainees, if you will, comfortable in their work environment, that they're not going to be replaced, that they can be able to do several things at a time, or they can take the time to do one thing really well and move to the next thing. And so that's what we have to really kind of include. Another situation would be techno uncertainty. Techno uncertainty is very interesting because it refers to a situation of unpredictable, continuous changes, and this is something that we all experience, where there's high-tech training today, then there's something new tomorrow. So we all have to be aware of this. I also wanted to point out really what is technostress. There was a concept of talking about what technostress was and evaluating it. I would highly suggest that as we move into the phase of understanding what diversity, equity, inclusion is more, that we all start to actually move forward into conducting research. One individual that I find very fascinating that may not get as much traction in the context of research right now is multiple people. Let's take Veranda Montgomery, for example, who does a lot of great work in the mentoring space. I really think that she's doing the research that's focused on really addressing the questions of mentorship as a science. Another individual that would be Angela Byers-Winston as well, that does the same level of high quality work. And I really think that, as we start to develop these niches in the field overall in the STEM field, we have to be aware and pay attention to these leaders when they're giving us this information about mentoring. So do not take mentoring so lightly, because without the proper tools, you won't be able to address these particular concepts like Technostress or John Henryism. So as I have 5 minutes left, because Dr. Murray is going to switch over to take over, I want you all to think about where technostress lies the most complicated for individuals that we may have in our workforce arena. So one in particular paper talks about how workers that are older may be more prone to technostress, but because they have aged, they've gained these awesome coping skills. So they're actually able to have a negative correlation with technology, meaning they reduce their overall techno strain. And what I also find interesting is that young workers will be more affected than older workers. So we have to pay attention to the younger individuals that are exposed to technology, not only when we're in the workforce, but also in our daily lives. And so there may be a constant overuse of that. And then also men currently, based upon the data, suggest that they experience more techno stress than women. And then lastly, individuals with greater literacy to technology reduce overall techno stress. And so it might be important for us to be accustomed to understanding what techno stress is so that we may be able to mitigate it later on. I also want you to be aware that there are things that may harm you. Oh, oh, Doctor. Oh, okay. I saw a comment. It's always a pleasure. So anyway, so back to the seminar. So there are certain things that can really affect you in your body specifically, and they're divided into your psychological mental state, your physical state as well, and emotional and spiritual. And so when you're thinking about stress, you want to be able to think about that with individuals, it may affect them differently, but this is kind of a general global overview. So one thing to keep in mind is that with physical illness, with stress or technostress, you may have repeated bouts of headaches, difficulty sleeping, sore muscles. However, with psychological stress, it may be uncertain about performance, information overload, underwork in routine jobs, and low confidence. So when you're having major bouts with technostress or stress in general, this can lead to a lot of different things. And then also with emotional stress, it can lead to anger, panic attacks, or anxiety. So we all have to be aware to be able to give our individuals a break as we push the science for it. And then also with burnout and awfulizing, chronic stress, and dependence upon unhealthy habits to manage stress are all things that we should be aware of as mentors, because we want to be able to practice good mentorship. And then as I start to close, I'm going to leave John Henryism for Dr. Murray, because Dr. Murray really loves John Henryism to talk about. But as I close, I just want to talk about these last concepts with technostress. I have about 3 minutes. So with this, technostress can be identified based upon personal triggers. So one exercise is actually to ask individuals the questions based around what we talked about. So if you can write down what techno overload is, techno invasion, techno complexity, techno insecurity, and uncertainty, you have now mastered what I really want you to glean from this seminar. I would love for you to be able to write these definitions down and just have them, put them in a kind of like a container, and put the definitions around everybody and ask them to write examples of each where they may experience it in the laboratory. And you may actually not want to talk about it that day. You're just collecting that information, and it's anonymous, right? So you may lay the bucket out by the door of the lab, and then they'll fill it up. Then take it home and read everything that everyone's talking about, and identify common triggers that may be happening in your laboratory setting so that you can address them. So then it's not coming from one individual. There's a safe space for individuals to talk about how they're feeling with technostress. And I really want you all to be aware that we want to consider not only coping mechanisms that Dr. Murray is going to introduce, but also be aware that we have to acknowledge what's happening, because certain situations may be amplifying techno stress. So if we're seeing social media things where people are maybe dying that day, or it may be affecting the individual, they may be having that stress plus techno stress and general stress in a context that is overwhelming. So be aware and be cognizant of this. So even I would suggest, like on Fridays, I have a diversity, equity, inclusion Friday separate from my lab meeting, where we just relax. I'll bring food, we'll talk, I'll ask them about concepts of what's going on, see if they're learning, address the situation. And it sometimes morphs into this enrichment Friday, where it's not all about diversity, equity, inclusion. It's just trying to enrich their soul to make sure that they're okay. And as with this last minute, I just want you all to be aware that consider cyber balance. And also think about creating support environments, and also think about creating conditions for focus that are separate from social media. And remember to manage your activity engagement and really start to carve out time for your family. So as I close, I just want you all to remember that stress alters the career climb, and that sometimes there are other individuals that are working really hard, that are doing a little too much, and they need a break. And this can really get into the concept of John Henryism, which Dr. Murray will touch on, along with her concepts of managing your time as well as managing technostress. So thank you for listening.
So technology is good and it's everywhere and we're dependent on it. It is causing stress, but the good news is there are methods for coping with technostress, and that's what I'd like to talk about, managing technostress. I want to put my points or my talk around 4 points: education, getting help, making time, and relaxing. Education, I'm going to start with that. Let's just sort of discuss that for a second. It's best if you know how to use the material that you'll be using. You're more efficient, you're more effective, you don't get frustrated, you don't get technostress. So as a mentor, allowing or organizing educational training sessions for your students for how to use the technology, particularly if it's complicated technology of the new microscopes and those kind of things, digital, whatever, getting good instructors in there to actually teach them how to use the machinery. Or there are also places that you can go online and get help. LinkedIn is giving, for example, a whole lecture on Python. And what's good about it, it's giving it from a level that even someone who doesn't know any computer coding would learn. That's just an example. Get an instructor, a good instructor who can talk at your level, not someone who's necessarily techno savvy and sort of skips things. There are books to read. At any rate, you and your mentees need to spend time actually trying to get or mastering the information so that you don't end up on the ladder of technical stress, similar to Jacob's Ladder, the movie. So you want to decrease your technical uncertainty and increase your digital literacy. Another thing as part of education is to make sure you have the right stuff. If you're somewhere trying to use a digital telephone, a rotary telephone, when you're trying to do Zoom or doing the wrong mic, things won't work. So of course you need the right stuff, and the stuff changes every day. Almost as soon as you buy the computer, it's almost obsolete. So you have to keep up with the information that's going out there in order to smoothly keep pace with whatever's going on. So you want to make sure that you stay with the right equipment, which means that even adds maybe a little more stress because you're adding new equipment. You have to add more education. There are programs, user-friendly programs that are out there that will help in organizing a lab or organizing a team or organizing a group and making sure that you're moving along more efficiently and more effectively. Learn about some of that software, user-friendly software. Get help. You shouldn't be spending, okay, you know everything about the computer, you can use it, you had your education, and things are just going to go wrong. I don't know why. But don't spend too much time trying to go in and fix something when there's someone who's better trained. Make sure that you have an IT team, either the IT team on your university, or get a whole group of people who know how to use the computer that you can call at midnight if you have to, who will help you with getting things working. Hopefully you have that IT team in advance of when you have to submit the grant to someone and it's due at midnight and you can't get it on. The same with when buying a piece of equipment, they give you a service contract, but make sure that even the software that you're getting information from them. And the person who sells you that piece or brings in to demonstrate that, make sure you get their IT person. Who do they call when they're out there trying to sell it? It doesn't work right. Who are they calling? Get that person, give a little conversation to that person up front, develop your instrumentations as knowing people who are at the company who will help you. And don't be afraid to send for help, and send for the right people for help. And delegating, that's another way to get help. Give it to someone who can do it. And in delegating to people, make sure that you're delegating to people who sort of like computers. Don't dump everything on one person who may not be. People are different. We're all wired different. Some people, we talk about technostress as being negative, but for some people, technostress, they need a little of that. They say it gets my juices running. Oh, I'm working now. And so for those people who seem to get technology easier, they enjoy doing that, they'd almost rather talk to the computer than you. Those people you can lean on more. You don't want to burn them out. But that person who is coming along slower, as mentors, we need to be able to see that and be flexible in our team. Not everyone in the team needs to do everything. And if we have one team member who's working a complicated piece of machinery, for example, some of these new digital imaging things, we may need to delegate that as a team rather than that one person doing everything, such that we don't burn out that one person. Time management. I'm on my third point already. I'm doing really good in time, people. Time management. Make sure that you are giving the time and setting the time to develop, learn, and use the technologies that you need to use. One of the biggest pitfalls of technology is distraction. And things that distract you when you're trying to do 3 things at once, all of a sudden you're anxious, you're frustrated, the cortisol levels, the stress levels in your body go up. So if you can cut down on some of that multitasking, decide on when you can do I'm going to the microscope at this time, that's when I can do it. I'm going to be doing the microscope, I'm going to do this, and that's my hour for doing it. I'm not going to be texting the chairman or whatever else I might have to do. Multitasking also, there's also a study which was done in 2019 before COVID that demonstrated that multitasking decreased cognitive processes. So can you imagine how much multitasking we're doing now, and how much more? Before, in 2019, Americans supposedly used digital screens for 11 hours. Can you imagine how much that's gone up now? Think about that. How much more are you doing, and how much are you putting all of it in? If you're trying, and this poor lady here is trying to do her laundry, she has the stove, she's cooking, she's looking at the screen. This is multitasking. And they say that your efficiency, your ability to do things well, is when you bring a whole self to doing whatever has to be done rather than trying to do a lot of things. So your efficiency goes up, but more than your efficiency goes up, your stress level will go down if you're bringing your whole self to a project rather than trying to multitask. So just see in your own self, and as well as trying to influence your mentees to try to stop some of the multitasking, to focus and bring that focus self out. She's staring at that screen. Maybe a blue screen would help, or glasses with a tint on it would help. There's a rule that's called 20-20-20. For every 20 minutes that you gaze at a screen, if every 20 minutes you look off for only 20 seconds for 20 feet and come back, it will decrease your probability of developing eye strain, called 20-20-20. Set some boundaries. Unplug. Don't work past when you're exhausted. Set a time to go home. Set a time that you're going to say, this is my time to get away from that computer. This is my time to get away from whatever else is the cell phone, the social media. Set some boundaries. How much, think of it yourself. How much time do you spend looking at this monitor? Either because you're on Zoom, and after Zoom, you're on email, whatever you're doing. How much time do you spend actually looking at a digital monitor? How much time then, for people in STEM, they leave the monitor and go get another monitor on the computer. Get a calendar. Mark out some times when you're going to use the computer, or you're going to learn something or whatever. And those are the times you do it. And other times you can have your whatever else is going on. So set some boundaries. But the most important thing on here, and you see I've set some boundaries that live a balanced life. You don't want to be on the computer all day or wherever. Set a balanced life. But the most important thing that's on this, that I would use this calendar for, is not on the calendar, and it is on the calendar now, and that is to set a time at which you say, I will work all day, but when it comes to this time, and it can be later or earlier, but when it comes to this time, this is my fun time, and I will not be using necessarily things that are going to be detrimental to me. I'm not going to be on the computer, perhaps. Maybe you need to use it a little, whatever. And there are times that you will go past this. A grant is due and you got to be on the computer all night because you didn't do other things earlier. But don't make it a habit then of working past that time. And when I'm saying working past that time, I'm saying unplug, go walking, do something else, dance, find a pleasure, something that's pleasurable. You don't want to work, go home, play, and sleep and dream about digital screens. Unplug. I want to get to the adrenal for a second. That is the gland of stress. And I want to just, I just want to review with you what that adrenal does really quickly. There are two glands on top of the kidney. If you're looking at the phone and you have stress, you should not have the kind of stress that is back here, but sometimes you do. You're trying to get something in and all of a sudden you're stressed and your body thinks, no, she's not trying to use the phone. She's actually not the guy trying to climb up to success, but you're over here laying in the water, and your body is at that level. Then that is when it is not good. That is truly not good, especially if you stay there. Dr. Hinton mentioned some of the things of the fight and flight. That's the middle of the adrenal, puts out a compound called epinephrine, and you can get all of these muscle tensions and things like that. But the real damage comes, these things go up and then they go down and they go up and they go down, hopefully as you walk away from whatever is stressing you. But the inside of the adrenal is doing that, but the external portion, the cortex, is doing cortisol. Glucocorticoids, a group, and the most common one is cortisol. And when that is dumped from the adrenal, it goes through the blood, it gets to the fat and breaks down the fat to fatty acids and glycerol. Stay with me, people. The glycerol goes into the liver and gets converted to glucose. Your glucose level is going up just because you're stressed. It goes to the muscle and it breaks down the protein and you get amino acids, and some of those go and you get more glucose being made from those. If you can keep someone worried long enough, you would increase the amount of fatty acid in the artery, that you would block the artery. You increase the amount of glucose in the blood such that you would predisposition them for diabetes. If you could stay there and stress them, oh, will I get tenure? Will I blah, blah, blah. And the amino acids breaking down, you'd have very weak muscles. And so, and I could go on, your immune system would go down, et cetera. The cortisol is not what you want released. And some of that is perception. If you can change your perception and say, I feel it, I'm going to talk to my adrenal. My adrenal is firing and I need my adrenal to calm it down because this is not that bad. I'm only trying to get the new phone put in. I'm only trying to get the paper jam in the printer fixed. That is what I'm going to do. I've done it before. I'm going to relax about it and at least talk to the adrenal, or at least talk to yourself that you change your attitude about what is stressing you. There are some things you can do in order to decrease the possibility of getting technostress, and certainly decrease technostress once you're in that position. One of them is deep breathing. The American Heart Society, the American Heart Association, and I'm not going to breathe with you, but I would like, for those who would like to, I'd like to say to use either of these two websites, and you will get to this. Push it, you can look away and you can breathe with it, and it's a very short 40 seconds, and it is meant as heart control and also a de-stressor. Try that on your own. Deep breathing. Also, it's even better if you cannot get away, go to the computer to look at deep breathing, but you could actually go and walk out in nature. Many of us don't have that every day, but try to walk out into nature if you can. There are studies that demonstrate that if you can just walk on a trail every day, that your cortisol level drops, and when your cortisol level drops, you're in better health. Singing and moaning. And I thought this slide had something on it. Did I go the wrong way? Singing. For some people, singing. I didn't push the button. I didn't want that to play right then, but that's okay. For me, when I hear that music, it relaxes me. I don't care what I'm fixing. If I hear, and I won't sing for you because singing helps me, but it doesn't help other people, it seems. But at any rate, singing, moaning, sometimes anything that, even rocking. Have you ever been into a nursing home and you see people rock and you wonder, they're not in pain, but they're rocking and they may be, and that rock actually decreases the cortisol release. Something about that rock, that gentle exercise. Meditation. Positive imagery. See yourself working with this piece of equipment, doing well, whatever it is, see the positive. Get a good laugh right now. Just laugh. There must be something you can laugh at. Johnny, are you laughing? And
yes, then, of course.
I didn't hear the laugh.
I'm sorry.
Very good. Very all right. Exercise, of course. Moving, certain exercises. If you're on a treadmill and you're saying, I have 20 more minutes to go, it may not be that bad an exercise, particularly for your heart, but your cortisol may not drop. You're competing, you're saying, how much more do I have to do? It's only about 5 more minutes and I'm so sick of this. If you're doing that, the cortisol doesn't drop. For some exercises that are more flowy, then it does drop. So find exercises that will help drop the cortisol level. And I'm really having problems with that. And of course, what would a good talk be on stress management without a demonstration? Can you you're working on the computer all day. Take your arm and your hand and just push it this way and that way for a second. That way and that way. Make sure these muscles are relaxing. The muscles of the upper arm. And of course, movement. And at this point, I'm going to ask you to move with me. Of course, you would move with your own music and you probably would be healthier and happier. But this is what we're going to move with today, people. Just move, laugh, grin, smile, feel good about yourself. I hope we're going to move with that. I'd like to conclude my comments today, leaving enough time for questions. I would like to review, educate, ask for help, manage your time so that you're unplugging, you're finding things, you're not multi-pack, you're finding places to put important things that you have to do, that you're not letting deadlines come up. It's nothing more technically stressful than knowing how to use your equipment, but waiting to the last minute to get something in, and something goes on wrong with that equipment, and all of a sudden you turn into the Hulk. Make sure that you're using your time and such that you're not waiting to last minute to do things that are important, that have to be done, that you need technology to do. Focus so that you're bringing a whole self to whatever you're working on. Practice relaxation. Remember that you set as the mentor, you set the example. If you are exercising, if you're using time management skills and teach those to the students, particularly if you're exercising with them, they will do the same. And you might even find a way to bond and create psychologically comfort zones, safe places. You might give them rewards and make sure that you're asking them, how do you feel about the technology that you're using? Try to think of, how do you feel? Do you feel stress? If you start feeling a little negative and you get negative thoughts, technostress has a psychological component that leads to your feeling like depression or down or I'm angry. If you're feeling those things, then say to yourself, you know, I need to work on this because I think this might be technostress, but make sure that you're looking for those in your mentees as well. And as I'm ending, live and work, use technology, but don't forget to play, to laugh, to have fun, and to live. Enjoy. Thank you. There we go.
And Dr. Murray, do you want to take questions, or you want me to cover John Henryism in the last 3 minutes?
Well, it's up. I would like to say it's up to the crowd, but I can't hear what the crowd wants. I'm looking for.
I think I can get it in 4 or
Go
5
ahead. Go ahead.
minutes.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Please,
So,
please
yeah.
go ahead.
So, sorry, earlier had somebody deliver some stuff. New lab, of course. Okay, so John Henryism is a concept that was developed by Sherman James. And Sherman James is of African-American descent. He's an epidemiologist. And what he realized was that there was this overworking, especially in African-American communities, and now research has expanded it to other communities. And in particular, if you remember the concept of John Henry, who used to lay down the track and he would go and he could race the machine, and then he just would win, but he basically overdid it and he lost it. And so this is kind of the concept that has been in the workforce for especially African Americans, a phenomenon that is actually shaping how individuals are working too much, and they have all these other stressors that are going on, and it leads to them actually committing themselves to basically dying. And so James, Dr. James, he took this concept of John Henry working hard and actually encountered it in the context of social and health disparities, and understand how we could link these phenomenons together to actually understand maybe how individuals that are minorities are experiencing John Henryism. So in this particular paper that Dr. Murray and I did, along with others that we worked with, we talked about toxic stress and burnout, and how John Henryism and social dominance in the laboratory and STEM workforce can directly alter someone's course of their career, and how mentors may want to be able to mitigate some of those stresses. You don't have to be a psychologist to be aware of things that may be negatively influencing an individual. And so this is something that we just want to draw some attention to. And remember, there's always an unhealthy balance of certain things. And these set of cartoons were done by my postdoc, Heather. And so what's in particular of importance here is that John Henryism is a coping mechanism for managing prolonged stress, especially when there's social discrimination, and by expanding higher levels of effort than normal. So for example, let's say that you have heard the concept where maybe minorities, in particular African Americans, have to work twice as hard or 4 times hard to get the same job, because you have to be on basically at a level of excellence all the time. And so this can have detrimental effects on your body. And so I just want you to all to be aware of, as mentors and mentees, that you want to be able to decline your stress, because stress can really lead to adverse effects, and it can also lead to shortening your life. In particular, there's been some studies more recently that have demonstrated that there's a shorter lifespan, up to 5.5 years, even in the controlling for education level with social economic status and health behaviors, when you're experiencing John Henryism or levels of other types of stress. And this types of stress can alter the career climb, because you're dying earlier, you're not appreciating your overall health, and Blacks in particular, or African Americans, and are to 1.5 times more higher, experiencing a large allosteric load of cumulative wear and tear of repeated stress on the body. And just being aware of these things can actually help to mitigate some of these things in the laboratory. And Dr. Murray's already touched on cortisol and adrenaline. So I just want you all to just think about that in the concept when you're thinking about technostress, stress, or John Henryism. Okay, thank you. And we'll be happy to answer questions.
I saw that Dr. I think Afanti put a video in. Thank you very much for adding that. And I think Dr. Jackson, you asked if the slides will be available later. The talks from all these talks are available. The actual video recording of this talk will be online at NRMN.
Well, this is a first. We usually have lots of questions. Like last time, maybe we explained it really well.
Another tip that I got from Feather Ives is that Fridays in the afternoon should be never reserved for any technology. And in fact, you should go home early on Friday. I'm quoting her. I think I'm quoting her actually.
I take that advice, and I've applied it to my laboratory, where sometimes half the day on Friday we can be in person, the other part is virtual. And then if we don't really need to do DEI Friday that week, we can cancel it. Because I think it's very important to be able to have a healthy life, because there's so many people in the lab that have families. So I think it's very important. Oh, someone just asked, I may have missed it, but what are the effective strategies to address John Henryism, especially for junior faculty? So this was a question. Dr. Murray, do you want to take part first, and then I can follow with my comments after, or what would you like to do?
I think when you have a schedule and you know what you have to do, if you keep your schedule and you know what you have to do, that you make sure that you're not saying yes too many times. And that you think that every time I say yes, it means that there's something else I'm either going to not be able to do, or I'm not going to be able to do as well. So to really have your schedule in your mind, so that when someone walks up and says, I have something great I need you to do, you can figure out how to say no effectively and efficiently, so that they will not come to you and overload you. You also know sort of what you're doing, how much you're doing. And so when you're looking at that, you have to talk to yourself and say, is this going to get me? Do I need to do all of this in order to achieve what I need to do? Or am I doing all of this, and half of this is service and half of this is something else? And my promotion, my merit raises are going to be based on something other than all of this hammering that I'm overdoing here as John Henry. Then it's time for you to take control of your career and say, I'm not on track. And so there is a tendency to do more because you're trying to you want to fit in, you want to say but I think just knowing that there is John Henryism, just knowing and calling, Alexa, stop, just knowing that there's John Henryism and call it by name. This is what I'm doing. You tend to get yourself to start seeing yourself as this valuable person, but not a valuable person that needs to hammer all day. And as far as this feeling that I'm working and I haven't worked enough, I think when you sort of look at your full day and say, this is when I go home, then you're relaxing at that end of the day. And you're not saying, gee, I should work a little longer, especially now with the pandemic. Before we had some going home. Now, if you are at home or you're working from a virtual screen, all of a sudden, the feeling is, I need to work all night until I fall out. And instead, if you put that, this is when my day stops, this is my boundary, then that helps with where it is. And this a feeling of racing every time someone says, did you do this, do this, do the feeling that I need to respond. At least I feel like when my chairman writes me, I want to respond right away. That gets to the point that I'm looking at the thing all day to see the email all day to say, is anybody writing me that I need to respond on? You have to sort of say to yourself, this behavior is not getting me where I need to go. I'm in control of my career. I need to talk to people to say back off or whatever I need to say in order to be able to continue on.
I definitely
AJ.
agree. Yes, ma'am. I definitely agree with all the comments Dr. Murray said. I actually learn every day from Dr. Murray. We're always writing together. And one thing that she's taught me is that it's okay if you use your startup to hire consultants to do certain things. Let's say that you feel like you need to keep up with the name. I'm at a name brand school, if you will, right? And so I feel like sometimes I have to keep up, right? Or I have to do more so that I'm looked at a certain way. So one thing she says, you can use your startup in a variety of ways. And so that's what I've learned to do so that I can manage this and be able to not only focus on my science, but also keep up in my mentoring and my DEI space. That's one concept. I also would say as a junior faculty, make sure that your mentoring committee communicates that in the mentoring recommendations when they're giving that to the chair. So for example, because R01s are harder to come by for Black investigators, I had them write that language directly into the mentoring committee report to state that I'm submitting maybe 4 R21s, a year versus 2, because I have to increase my chances. And so the same thing with R01s as well. And so that's communicated in that language. And so calling it by name and then having it in documentation is very important, and having your mentor committee acknowledge it, because now you make it aware to your chair. And so these things, that way you know that you're not alone and you have documentation for it. And another comment is just that sometimes it's okay to just say no. Like it's just the easiest thing in the world to do is say no. It's hard to implement that, but you can say no, and you practice that sometimes in the mirror. Maybe you may not have the highest level of confidence right now, but if you practice with saying no to yourself about, no, I'm not gonna, eat after 9 o'clock, for example, or no, I don't wanna, go into, late night at, 11, 12 o'clock working. I'm gonna wait till the morning. That reduces your anxiety levels tremendously. And sometimes just monitor your heart rate. I monitor my heart rate, letting me know kind of like, am I getting too stressed during the day, or, are things bothering me? And then I also look at my resting heart rate. For me, if it's not in the 60s, I know that I'm stressed and that it's not good. I should be leaning towards trying to be, an athlete and get it down to low 60s, early 50s. But that's my goal. But if I'm going too high up, it's not a good thing, right? And then the other question that was in there, Dr. Murray, they were talking about organizational level. So they said that, we were given individual and mentor intervention levels for Technostress. And I guess they're assuming that there are some ideas that we may have around the organizational level. So would you like to answer this first?
I think the organization should have a strong, make sure that they have a strong IT group to help the faculty. I think the organization needs to perhaps be the ones organizing some of the training sessions around general techno things. And they may also be the ones who are implementing, bringing in people to teach these courses. They may even make sure that they have courses that are, I think almost now that, you know, people need to know a little, the students need to know a little coding. I think perhaps those kind of things should be put on campuses. And I think also the campus should be very aware of the faculty and the students and the staff's level of stress, just stress in general, whether it's technological or whatever. And I think they should implement programs for that. And that may be from everything to having lounges where people could go and look like they're walking through gardens in the winter, a winter garden. I mean, whatever they need to do at that institution, places that provide exercise rooms, not that you need an exercise room to exercise, but exercise facilities, things that would allow people to unplug from the computer during the day in order to try to live a more balanced and a healthier life.
And for the organizational level, it requires you bringing deans and provosts to meetings, you know, maybe kind of suggest to your chair that, you know, there are some things that are bigger than, you know, us, you know, and so at the chairs meetings, chairs have to get involved. So if you're a mentor with a chair position, that's the time to actually talk with the other chairs. If you're a dean that's on the phone or a senior associate dean of maybe diversity or education, this is for you to bring in when you're having the dean's meeting and you can talk about this. One way to implement other types of strategies is actually using literature and to demonstrate that there's a need for this. There's already literature out there about how organizations can be transformative with their actions. And so this is one way that they can be transformative by monitoring what's going on at the individual level and all the way up to the top. I don't think that there's.
And also sometimes government agencies respond to what's going on. So NSF is one of those who will put out an RFA to say we need to decrease stress, techno stress. That being put out will get a whole lot of the call for money or the call for research in that area will get it put out on a lot of institutions who may have not noticed it. And sometimes you need not the faculty influencing the deans and the chairs, but you need somehow to get to them and say, you influence the chairman of the department who you're putting pressure on to say, bring in more money. And so his conflict of interest might not be in me being less stressed. However, someone farther up the line from him might be the better person to address and say, we got to do this, and sort of send that person the information to come back to the chair and say, we will reward you for allowing things that decrease stress within your department, and the chair will respond. If we go to the chair and we go to the dean, they may be all under such pressure right now to recap what was lost during COVID. They may not respond. And this is a time that we really need it because of the isolation. The entire thing of COVID has put us in a different form of stress. I mean, the amount of time we're now looking at a screen has skyrocketed from the other 11 hours a day. That's ridiculous. 11 hours a day, can you imagine? I thought that was bad, but now I'm sure the research will show it's much more. Well, with that, I think we're over time, Johnny.
Yes. All right, let me bring that up here. All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Hinton and Dr. Murray, for participating in this webinar. Again, we always appreciate having you both here with us. This was such an important discussion, and this was just really helpful information and good tips and advice. So thank you so much. And we look forward to hosting more webinars this month for Black History Month. We do have 2 more coming up every Thursday this month. So please join us for those. But thank you all for your questions in the chat, and thank you all for attending. And we hope everybody has a wonderful day.